Recording in progress.
Zoom. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our next session of the NCHV conference. I'm just taking a minute to let folks in. So give us just a minute. We're going to admit folks into the Zoom session. All right. You may see me looking strangely at the computers because as folks come in, I have to make sure I admit them. But welcome everyone to this is session Employment and Income 3 about match quality, and I'll actually maybe I'll just pull that slide up so we can see it. It's optimizing career transition match quality for returning veterans. That's the session you're in, and we're thrilled to have you. You are muted through Zoom. That's the way it comes in, but we will have the opportunity later, perhaps if people, depending on how big we get, for people to talk, but certainly we want you to submit your questions and chat away. We really want this to be interactive. We want you to ask questions. So please make sure you take advantage of that chat function. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cindy Borden. I'm Director of Training and TA at NCHV, and I'm the moderator for today's session. But you're not here to listen to me talk. You're here to listen to our speaker today. And I'm thrilled that we have Brett Anderson from H2 Communication. Brett and I have known each other a long time, go back a long way, and he is fantastic and has great information. I'm going to read his official bio just because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'll just say before that you're in great hands with Brett. But Brett Anderson, PhD, is the president of H2 Communication LLC. H2C is a veteran-owned small business, job readiness training, and executive coaching and frontline leadership development company comprised of human communications specialists who focus on human interaction issues, human to human and human to technology, which can impact a wide array of life planning situations and business endeavors. H2 Communications' goal is to provide real-world active learning strategies, one-on-one counseling practices, and social science research to help businesses overcome and transcend everyday struggles and help employers find and keep the right candidate for their business needs. The other thing I'll say that's not on this official bio is that, as I said, I've known Brett for a long time, is that for many years, Brett was a trainer and curriculum development for NVTI, the National Veterans Training Institute, that's responsible for the TA provider for the Jobs for Veterans State Grant Program from the Department of Labor. So he has a lot of experience with providing employment services and training for veterans who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand things over to Brett. Brett, take it away.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and it's always great to hear and work with you again. Hello, everyone, and I'm glad that you're here for this presentation. Like Cindy indicated, I've worked with the National Coalition for Homeless Vets for approximately 6 years as a technical assistance advisor. Went all over the country, saw a lot of things that are related to the services that you guys provide. So the focus of this particular presentation is going to be on some of the teachings and the things that I learned throughout that 6-year process, but also related to my doctoral dissertation on this particular effort to get homeless vets employed in quality match opportunities. So if you can just move to the next slide, Cindy, I appreciate it. So the unemployment rate, I like to start off with, you were always told never start off with statistics, but I always like to start with statistics because I think statistics help us kind of understand what's going on. So the unemployment by race and sex, when we look at the pandemic and then we try to extrapolate those numbers into today, you can see that you still have quite a few individuals who are unemployed. Before the pandemic, it was much lower. It was around the 3.1 area, but now you have the 4.8, 8.8, and 7.7. So we're still having this number of individuals who are historically marginalized in terms of the workforce, meaning women and people of color. that are consistently high in terms of their unemployment rate. That's the purpose of the statistic, just to let you know. Next slide. All right, so homeless veterans, what is the look? What's the outlook in 2021? I'm just going to walk through a couple of the things that you guys may be already aware of, but I also like to make note of these things because these are foundations for why individuals are in this particular plight. So in terms of homeless vets, next slide, or you have to click it because it kind of goes through it, Cindy. Thank you, ma'am. So the number is down by 43% since 2011, which is great. I know that it's something that you guys may be recognizing depending on your tenure within this field, but recognize that you're well below 40,000. So what that means is, yay, we're down. But what that also means is you're getting to the group of individuals that are just more long-term unemployed, long-term homeless. They recidivate quite a bit into this particular area and into this field. So you're dealing with the individuals that are just harder to place and harder to move forward in this endeavor. Next slide. So social isolation and lack of support are major risk factors among US vets. And one thing that I like to point out is that in general, veterans have low marriage and high divorce rates. 1 out of 5 live alone. What does this statistic mean? What does this say about what's going on with vets? The support group, the support network for these individuals is sparse. So their safety nets have a lot of gaps and a lot of holes in them. For those of you who work with these individuals, you know that and you see that on a regular basis. And so we have to fortify that net a little bit tighter. So next slide. So veterans are obviously at greater risk than non-vets. I mean, there's, this has been a redundant statistic. And you can see that in 2015, that veterans were just at a higher risk of homelessness than non-vets. But this has been a pretty steady statistic, even though the disparity has declined a little bit over time. It's still out there. Veterans are just more in that population. Thank you, Cindy. Veteran statistics point to substance abuse as a major factor for homelessness. As many of you probably know this, but studies have pointed the blame to substance abuse as one of the leading causes of vets being homeless. Not only that, but it's also a strong predictor of future homelessness. Substance abuse includes both alcohol and drug abuse. So people are doing this type of they're practicing these types of practices, and oftentimes that gets them into that space or keeps them there. Mental illness is yet another leading cause. So a large-scale VA study of the mental health system in 2012 revealed that mental disorders are common among homeless vets. The VA's Inspector General noted that mental illness is also a strong predictor of a vet going homeless after discharge from active duty. Cindy indicated that when I was working with the National Veterans Training Institute, when it was at the University of Colorado, we did a lot of this type of work, and we dealt with a lot of the mental health issues. Most veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder, that's well identified, but a lot of veterans who are not directly related to combat, did not do a lot of combat in their tenure in the military. They have undiagnosed mental illness issues. So my dissertation dealt with both individuals who had post-traumatic stress disorder and those who also had undiagnosed mental illness. And a lot of them had a very hard time staying within the employment arena, because I know that's what we're going to talk about for this particular session. So anxiety was a big issue for that. And it was hard to pinpoint what type of anxiety. So most of them were diagnosed with GAD, generalized anxiety disorders. And as some of you may know, those type of disorders make it difficult for people to not only be aware of their hot buttons, but also be aware of how to remedy those hot buttons within the workplace. Next slide. Lack of affordable housing. Well, we know that's a problem for non-vets and people who aren't homeless. It's a big problem all across the country. I know that houses and affordable housing is a very serious issue, and Many people struggle with that, not just veterans. But when you're homeless and you don't have that opportunity, getting in is even longer. And I like to analogize the situation like this. If you're not homeless and you're looking to buy a home and you go to put in a bid on a home, you might stand in line with 20 people. But if you're homeless and you're trying to get and find housing that is affordable, that's safe, that's livable, you might stand in a line of 300 people. So the line is just much longer and the wait is just much more deleterious. And therefore it exacerbates all the symptoms that we just brought up and all the causes that we just brought up just now. So this is a major issue in most large metropolitan cities. Next slide. So affordable healthcare. I don't know if any of you have been on the exchanges within your areas, but healthcare is a major issue, and making sure that you get the right healthcare, whether it be VA or TRICARE, or if you're on the health exchange, those things are going to be a big issue no matter what. And then obviously unemployment greatly contributes to this problem because several studies, which included mine, have identified unemployment as one of the factors that contribute to the problem of homelessness. If you have a problem of finding a job due to a lot of factors that we just brought up, plus mental illness, substance abuse, and you're a veteran, that stigma sticks, and therefore employers have a really difficult time onboarding you into their area. So veterans' poverty and homelessness persist mainly due to those reasons. All right, so that's an overview of what some of the problems are. Obviously, this is multifaceted, so there's no one solution to all the problems, all the issues that are brought up. But we're here to talk about how employment plays a role in this particular endeavor. So in my study, I dealt with returning veterans and what some of the problems that they identified in terms of work. So from a national survey of returning vets, and we're talking this generation of veterans, the OAF, OIF, and OND veterans, it found that 1/3 of OIF veterans report work problems, including job loss after deployment. Veterans from a variety of campaigns and wars with mental illness are more likely to find part-time work, which isn't satisfactory. And oftentimes that part-time work doesn't provide livable wage employment, as well as the full-time work rarely provides livable wage employment. And combat veterans describe a lower sense of self-concept and self-worth during the job search and after losing employment. So we have a lot of psychological impacts that are associated with work because of the identity issues. So here's my question to you guys, and you can put your response in the chat. What's more important? Number one, is placement more important, or is career research more important? And this is for you guys to respond. Research is what Crystal says, okay. You can speak up personally too if you want to. You don't have to put it in the chat feature. Okay, Gabriel Fernandez says, veteran career research. A lot of folks are saying, okay, let me go back.
Looks like we have quite a few folks saying research here, Brett.
Yeah, and then
we have
Bob
an
Notch
it depends. Sometimes placement, get things stabilized first. Both,
and
we've
Bob,
got some both.
That's a great response, yes. So Bob's response is probably more on the line. Now, Jacqueline, when we say they're equal, it's a cadence issue. When do you do one over the other? Because placement is a stabilizer. And Cindy, you can go ahead and put the next slide up, the next point up. So yeah, placement is a stabilizer, but career research is a self-esteem builder. So it depends on the veteran you're working with, but if placement is a stabilizer, and we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy in this case, we need to be able to build psychological safety. We need to build those or satisfy those needs first, and then we can get to the self-esteem type of stuff. Now, one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand is I was in several sessions regarding homelessness, and I remember back in the early teens of the 2000s, The big issue was, um, what do we, housing has to be first. So it was a housing first mantra. Housing, 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 housing. So we went with that. We said, okay, we're going to do housing first. Let's see how that works. So we did housing first. And then what we found was that a lot of people were getting into these houses, but then they weren't staying, or the houses were becoming a little bit dilapidated. And many factors resulted in that, but employment played a big role because employment helps an individual have dignity and pride within that home. And I'll give an example. I was working with Minnesota, and this one individual, she got a write-up as a supported employment representative who helped this Native American veteran who he and his family, they were living in a trailer in Minnesota. She got him out of the trailer and into this neighborhood. It was the whole white picket fence. It was the brick yard and the brick home with the big yard, all those types of things. And the family was there for 6 months and then left and went back to the trailer. So they couldn't figure out why. She got this big write-up in the paper because it was a big deal. But on page 42, they talked about how the family went back to the trailer. So let me ask you guys, why do you think that family ultimately left that community? Okay, so Val says too big of a jump too quickly. The trailer was comfortable. Keep going. You're almost there. Was it what they wanted? Was it affordable? Yeah, it was being subsidized, so it was affordable. Less rules and regulations living in the trailer. They actually went to a community that didn't have homeowners association requirements. So that was that was a plus. So you're almost there. You guys are getting close. Okay, Frederick, when you say a neighborhood, what do you mean? Is someone on an iPhone, transportation to work? Okay, transportation. It was well, if you live in Minnesota, you know that transportation is challenging. But in the metropolitan area, you could get to most places there, but it still was challenging. So transportation was part of the problem, but not the biggest problem. Yes. So Jeff, did they feel like they fit in? You're getting close. No, they didn't. And why not? Why didn't they feel like they fit in? Hmm. See, lack of surrounding support, a lot of information. Ethnicity, that's a big word, Gabriel. We'd have to unpack that one, but we won't do that because we don't have time to do that yet in this session. But why do you think they didn't fit in? They felt like they didn't fit in. They did not move there, but they were placed there. Okay, Frederick. So that's true. Um, okay, the wealth gap, that's a big one that we'd have to unpack as well, Crystal. But yeah, that's the whole poverty issue. The real issue is this. When the family got there, and all of you guys were touching on things that were major important, so no one was wrong in what you said. But the reality was is that when they moved to that neighborhood and they got into that home, initially it was great. It felt like a stabilization kind of situation, but their identities didn't match the community. What they did, the cadence of their work, what type of work they did, how they took care of the lawn, how they viewed living in that neighborhood and in that house and the comfort that they had there. It all seemed to be out of phase from where they were before. So it was a bit of a jump too quickly, and maybe they needed to stair step up into that space. But really, they felt out of place because they didn't feel like they were doing what other people in that community were doing. They looked like they stood out and they were oddballs. And as a result, their identity was challenged every day going in, not by others in the community, but by themselves and their inner voice and that intrapsychic press that many individuals have. Those are those media reports that go inside your head that tell you who you are and who you're not. And they kept seeing who they weren't in that community, not who they were. So they went back, and that's it. So housing cannot be the only answer. They needed something else to help make them fit and feel like they were like they had a purpose in that neighborhood. And work could have been one of them. It took them a while to find work and employment, but it wasn't quick enough. All right, thank you guys for indulging me in that discussion. Okay, Cindy, next slide. So we got to figure out, okay, we know a little bit more. We know actually a lot about the customers that come to us, the clients that we see, and how they live, how they operate. You got a lot of information about the things that are affecting them. But now let's talk about the other piece of the pie, the employer. So there are two workforce models that emerged post-World War II in the work environment. One was the core periphery model, which we call an environment fit. And what this basically says is that there's a core group of individuals that work in any company, and those core group of individuals will always have employment no matter what in that company. And then the company brings in these individuals who are on the periphery of that core, either for certain projects or to do other types of work like administrative work, or in some situations, just straight labor type of work. So that model is very popular, still very popular today. Many people, many employers are still using that. And one specific employer that I'll reference is one that we have a tendency to place individuals in quite a bit, and that's construction. That field really kind of operates off of this model. Then the second model is the high performing work skills model. So the high performing work skills model, or HPWS, is more like a person fit. So when we say high performing work skills, what we're saying is that this person, this individual, this customer that we're working with, this applicant who's trying to find employment, they are looking to find work, but they have a certain skill set that fits within that workspace. And so they're more transient or more fluid. They can come in and out of the workplace as needed to work on these projects. And this is more of the Google, the Silicon Valley approach, if you want to take it to the prototype. But you can find that in construction. And a lot of that was actually happening with individuals who were immigrants or H-1B folks who had permits to come here and work. They were cultivated for the high performing work skills, but they were also very seasonal in their employment. So that person fit kind of helps us understand a little bit more. But as you know, the workforce is moving in more of a high performing work skills approach, especially when you start to view that more individuals are moving towards a 1099 employment rather than W-2 employment. And a lot of our veterans have a lot of high performing work skills because they obtained that while they were in the military. They got security clearances, they got a high degree of competence in their workspace, especially when they were in the military because they were trained, quite heavily trained. Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. And so when we look at employers, we have to say to ourselves, okay, so how do employers rate individuals that are trying to get in and out of the workforce? The Department of Labor in 2019 did a longitudinal studies of individuals who held, and they found that individuals held about 12.3 jobs between the ages of 18 to 52, with nearly half of those 12.3 jobs at average happening before the age of 25. And we define the job as an uninterrupted period of work with a particular employer. So the next chart is just a graph to kind of show you what happens over time. So what do you think the average age is of most of the individuals that you see that are homeless? Someone just put it up there in your chat. Okay, Frederick said 40, yeah. And the range is probably between 38 to 46, that range. Some of you are seeing folks that are in the 50s, which is much more of the reality. So when you look at this, the diagram of this chart for men and women, when you reach the age of 48 and above, you're expected to be stabilized within the workforce, meaning that you're in employment now that's going to last you until retirement. or at least get you up to close to that age of retirement. And then you go from there. Now, after retirement, you can probably find more work that's more high performing work skills if you reached a certain level within the workspace. But that's the expectation. Now, with pensions being 2% or less of businesses, they offer defined benefit plans, which are pensions. Most people are, when they leave employment, they're thrust into the world of getting their required distributions off of their 401k. And as you know, if you don't do a 401k appropriately, or if you don't do that at the right time with dollar cost averaging and compounded interest, you really don't have enough money to live and survive. So individuals who are in their 50s or 40s, and they've been a substance abuser over time, they're not married, they don't have a secure support system, they really don't have the financial security. Again, this is one of those big gaps. Their safety net is really, really sparse. And so employment to them is actually much higher. And what you'll find is that these individuals mimic more of the individuals between the ages of 18 to 25, where they job hop. They just go to job to job to job to job. That is not beneficial for someone in that age group, because employers are not hiring people within that age group at that cadence. They just don't do it because they look at you as faulty or stigmatized if you're doing that type of job hopping at that age. So this is a big problem within employers and how they view the folks and the citizens that we work with. Next slide. So employers want people who are going to stay. So the Center for American Progress in 2017 found average cost to replace an employee, 16% of annual salary for high turnover or low paying jobs earning under $30,000. So for example, the cost to replace a $10 an hour retail employee would be about $3,328. How did they calculate these costs? Just so you know, it was the recruitment, the interviewing, the hiring, the onboarding, which means giving them a place to work, a badge or a uniform, a computer, a phone, and then training them. Those were the costs that they added up. And then so 20% of the annual salary for mid-range positions, 30,000 to 50,000. So that could cost up to 8,000. And I think there's one more, Cindy, on this. Yeah, and then up to 213,000 of annual salary for highly educated executive positions. So obviously it could cost quite a bit of money. So the lower you are on the scale, obviously you're not, the cost of losing you isn't great, but it's still, there is a price tag associated with that. So when you're in the 50s, what are you expected to be? A CEO, or are you expected to be someone who's not that? Yeah, so it's easier for them to lose you and to let you go in those areas. But so our folks need to be more protean in their job search, meaning they need to be more of a generalist, not a specialist in our area. But they need to be able to stick within the workforce. So that's sort of the dance that's hard for us as practitioners who work with this population to try to get folks to understand. They have to be able to be generalists, but they also have to be able to say, okay, I need to be able to stay within the job. So I got to be able to do a lot of things well, and so that helps me stick. So yeah, you can move to the next slide, Cindy. So what is the match quality assessment using Boundaryless or person fit model, Boundarylessness? So person fit workforce attachment practice is the practice that says, look, we're going to help you be that sort of shapeshifter. But in the process of being a shapeshifter, we're going to help you also stick within the workforce, within that company. So it's more conducive to individuals who have high performing work skills. And there's a lot of research out there that says that homeless vets, or even combat vets, but specifically homeless and combat vets are close to this in their profile and their makeup. They want to own their own business. They want to do their own thing. They have talents that they don't think are easily placeable within the workforce, and they want to be able to use that skill set to make money, to make a living, and to stabilize it. So we have to be able to assess the individual's interests, traits, and skills that fit within a variety of occupations. That's what boundarylessness is, or volition, career volition. And many of the agencies that you work with, or agencies that you're working among, really don't have the kind of partnerships with businesses that require the deep organizational knowledge or boundarylessness job seeking skills in order to place these individuals in a secure manner within that particular agency. So we need to shift away from these environment fit workforce preparation models and fit more with the person fit workforce preparation strategy. So how do we do that? So let's move towards this protocol. So the step-by-step protocol, we need to utilize an employability theory framework. And employability theory just says there's three things that individuals have to be able to do. They have to have a career identity, they have to have adaptability, and they have to be able to have human and social capital to meet those requirements. Those are the three dimensions of employability. And that's what that framework is asking. So in order for us to assess for that, we have to determine career volition, meaning what occupations can this individual actually do that we can help them fit within the workforce beyond their military occupational specialty. And when we say RIASEC, that's a Holland code that you would get from ONET. So I know many of you may be familiar with the interest profile on ONET. Well, there's a lot of tools out there that refer to a RIASEC code. That's what Holland brings up. We have to assess the family situation, meaning we have to know where the gaps in the safety net are for this individual because they can fall through the gaps quickly. We have to be able to assess their personal finances because oftentimes when individuals who do find employment and it is working well for them, are they spending their money in a way that's going to help them sustain that model or sustain where their living standards are, and then ultimately grow. And then number 5, administer the 5-factor assessment to determine the best occupational fit. Now, this is the different one. This is the unique one. I know many of you are probably already doing protocols 1 through 4, but number 5 is the unique one. And the reason why we talk about number 5, I think you can move to the next slide, Cindy, is that, and this is related to my dissertation, it helps us understand how people fit. We know how people work. Or how they might work within a workforce, but we have to determine how they fit. So what I did is I took the 5-factor model, and I don't know if any of you have been exposed to that, but I'll let you know what that is. The 5 factors are extroversion, openness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and conscientiousness. Conscientiousness has been linked, highly linked to career advancement. So I measured conscientiousness amongst the other 5 of the 5 factors. But conscientiousness was the one that was measured for this particular study. So let me tell you what the dependent variable was. So we were saying, look, if we can assess how a person fits within the workforce, and we can measure what their fit algorithm is, meaning extroversion, openness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and conscientiousness, then we can determine how they might interact with individuals within the workforce that they're going to be placed in. And if we can understand how they interact, then we can also mitigate a lot of the triggers and the other problems that occur when an individual gets into the workplace and then gets triggered and then has a lot of and I'll just say that a lot of degradation in terms of their work ethic. And the work ethic just basically is, can they get to work on time? Do they follow the instructions of their supervisor? Do they get along well with others? And do they get to work on time? Do they follow instructions of the others? And do they get along well with the people who already work there? So, yes. So thank you, Cindy, for writing this down for the group so that they know what it is. So we said, okay, we want to measure conscientiousness, how they appear, and do they believe that they have the ability to get into the workforce. So the FFNPQ, which is the 5-factor nonverbal personality questionnaire, that's the 5-factor assessment that was used. It's a formal tool. And the average score was about a 37. And this was the conscientiousness score. So 37, remember that number. The specific level of functioning was a rater score that said, so one of you guys were a rater, you were saying, does this person look like they can go to work? How is their hygiene? Do they have the right equipment? Are they healthy and enough to go to work on a day-to-day basis? The highest score is 20. So in this case, the mean was 18. So most folks fit the part. They look like they could go to work. The vocational locus of control scale, that's this mean score. And that was on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. What that means is that, look, if I have internal locus of control, that means that I believe I have control over how and when I'm placed within the workforce and how successful I will be. And so an external locus of control means that something else outside of the workforce is causing me to lose my employment or to have job loss situations. And as you can see, the average score in this one was about 2.65. So right about just above half felt that they actually had more control over it. This score, the number of consecutive days employed, is the dependent variable. And in that case, the mean was 27. So how does this all fit together? So individuals who scored at least a 37 on the FFNPQ had an 18 in terms of do they look the part, and they had at least a 2.6 or more in their vocational locus of control scale. They would work 27 and a half days more than individuals who didn't get this particular treatment. That's pretty good until you look at the standard deviation. So standard deviation just says how many points below and how many points above the means. Yeah, go back to that. Thank you, Cindy. How many points above the mean? No, go back to, yeah, stay here on this one. How many points above the mean and how many points below the mean did that individual work? So what we found was that, okay, individuals who have at least a 37, an 18 on the specific level of functioning, and felt like they had at least a moderate degree of control over whether they could get into the workforce, they would have at least almost 24 more days on top of the average. So they would work 24 more days. That's basically a month. So in essence, you were getting 2 months out of individuals who felt like they were able to fit within the workplace and they had high conscientiousness scores. Individuals who didn't feel that way, obviously you go down 23. So that would leave them with roughly 4 points or 5 points in terms of the mean score. So you don't have a bell curve. You don't have a curve that starts low and then has a big curve in the medium and then goes back down. What you have is this inverted bell curve. You had a lot of people who worked very short time, had a lot of short-term jobs, and then a lot of people who worked for a very long time. And what we found was that the individuals with the high conscientiousness score, they worked for a long time. That was just, they were able to advance on the job. Yes, Cindy, that's exactly how it looked. That's exactly how the curve looked. So, but you can see it's a low number. So we weren't able to find significance in a lot of the data because of the low number. Had we had a higher number, I believe the scores would have stabilized a little bit easier. And I believe we would have been able to find significance. But the next slide will tell us, okay, so what contributed the most? And this is the coefficients table. So in this table, and I want you to pay attention to where it says correlations participation, because that's the critical figure that we're looking at. These numbers represent what percentage of that 27 days was represented by what we did in terms of the independent variables. My dog's barking because there's someone delivering something at our door. The conscientiousness score, the specific level of functioning, and the vocational locus of control score. So as you can see, 19% of the folks, this represented 19% of why individuals worked 27 days and above. And don't worry about the negative signs, they really are just statistical figures. 16% about specific level of functioning, and then why did they feel like they had control of getting a job? That was about 24%. So roughly 60% of why individuals get and keep a job was explained by this particular study. So that's helpful to know that we figured out about 60% of why these individuals work. And the 5-factor score hadn't previously been used. The other indicators had been used in other studies, and the information that was found in the specific level of functioning and the vocational locus of control, they were both similar. in all the other studies. Next slide. All right, so we're talking about how do these individuals keep a job? So the statistical research design of the study provided a much needed and potentially less complicated vector, meaning a pointer from an environment fit to a person fit employment retention practice. How do we go from saying, okay, you're here, we just have to place you and stabilize you, versus, okay, let's really find something that's going to fit with your skill sets and how that all works. And then how are you going to be able to interact with the individuals that are in that workspace with you? So this model is more of a bridge from that construction to, okay, how can I really then find employment that's going to be meaningful for me, that I'm going to be invigorated on, and I'll stick with. The statistical findings identified the 6 major components related to employment retention, and we'll go over those in the next slide. But there was some additional information, and this probably explains the other 40% that we weren't able to uncover in this particular study, is that cognitive programming, like moral reclamation therapy or thinking for a change, those are important. This is how individuals determine what are those triggers within the workplace when I'm interacting with other individuals, like my supervisor or someone who has power over me, that causes me to either want to stay in the workplace or just, no call, no show and quit. Um, those of you who are the practitioners and do primary case management, we need to utilize more of an individualized placement support strategy or supportive employment strategy. It's not the fidelity of IPS isn't exact for our audience, because it's, that's evidence-based for an audience that has mental health issues. Our audience has a broader spectrum of issues, but IPS is a helpful strategy, and it's a helpful way to look at how we can help these individuals obtain employment, get secure, and then move forward. But also a motivational interviewing strategy. Go back, Cindy, for me one slide. And so the motivational interviewing strategy, this is a communication strategy that helps build that internal locus of control, that helps get that individual moving towards what they really want to accomplish. Then obviously a strong relationship with core employers in the area. And from what my experience taught me in the 6 years that I worked with HRP, very few of the practitioners that I worked with had someone who was dedicated to building an employer base within your area. Okay, now you can get to the next slide, Cindy. So this is what works. Science has informed us of these 6 major components. Number 1, we need to implement a job readiness training process that includes unconscious bias and awareness within the employment process. We need to know how employers view our folks, how they onboard our folks, and then how they interact with our individuals while they're in the workplace. We need to do this by using a battery of assessment tools that help us predict, because that's what we use formal assessments for, to help us predict how the person not only is going to act, but also how the environment's going to interact with how that person relates to work and themselves. That's often called triadic reciprocal causation. Obviously, you saw that we need to use a cognitive-based curriculum to establish hot button awareness within the individual veteran. Yep, next one. Yeah, having an MI skilled core case management staff, that's very important, because we can build, encourage people to move forward. Go back, Cindy, one slide. And then dedicated IPS job development staff skilled at interpreting and operationalizing local labor market information, so we know what employers are going to be better used for this. And I'll explain the model that I'm using in just a moment. And then the establishment of a coalition culture of service providers aligned with IPS principles. You're not funded to do everything. I know that your funding doesn't allow you to be the one-stop shop for all this, so you have to rely on other vendors who do this type of work. So building that coalition is very important. Then we go back to the dedicated IPS job development staff skilled at interpreting and operationalizing local LMI. It's really important that a job developer go to an employer if with a tool in hand that says, look, we can measure what our folks are doing in terms of interaction patterns. And if we can then measure that within your workplace, we can see if there's a match. And we use a lot of visual graphics to help us do that. So we're getting employers, and I'm working with veterans who are incarcerated and they're trying to get past incarceration, either federal or state probation and parole. And we're working with employers who administer the assessment to their staff, and then we administer it with the returnees, the justice involved citizen. And then we get the visual graphic and we see, okay, if we're going to place this individual into this workspace, does that visual match up? Does that visual match up? I saw that Gabriel says it's not, IPS is not easy to implement if the veteran does not want to acknowledge mental health or chooses not to use VA due to past experience. You're absolutely right. The next slide, I think, sort of speaks to that, Gabriel. So the supported employment in IPS, some of the core principles, you're not excluding anybody, you're integrating employment with treatment. And they're competitive jobs. They're not always just, sort of the low-hanging fruit jobs. The rapid job search, systematic job development, that's working with the employer as well as the individual. Time unlimited support. I think there's one more. Yeah, consumer preferences. And this is where you're saying, Gabriel, the veteran actually has to choose to work. They have to actually want to do this, because if they just want to get income for a short term, this program is not going to be the best for them. They just want placement. They just want income, and we can move forward from there. But if they choose to work, then let's really do a robust effort to get them into the workforce. And then obviously benefits planning, including personal financial counseling. These are the core principles of this particular process. Okay, so I think I've left at least 15 minutes for questions for those of you who have questions. Okay. This is long. Alex says, I wonder if there could be more opportunities for vocational assessments, job shadowing, so that the veteran can experience a particular job, get linked to a job that highlights their strengths. It would be helpful to have employers that would be open to these types of assessments, job shadowing options, and so on. I agree with that, Alex. I think that's a good approach, because, we're always better. Everyone is better when they've had experience doing something, and then they build up to it. So I think that approach works. What other questions do you guys have?
I'm going to ask a question, Brett, while other folks
Go
are
ahead,
typing,
Cindy.
to give folks a chance to type, because it's one that I hear often and I know you've heard before. And Gabriel's point sort of touches on a little bit, but it's this whole idea of, I get funding from Department of Labor, from VA, from my local workforce board, from whoever it is that I get funding for, and they want me to put veterans in jobs.
Right.
I don't have the money, I don't have the staffing, I don't have the ability to do an IPS model or to do some of these other things. How do I start, and what do I do, knowing that I have these other constraints, financial constraints or grant requirements that I might have to meet that may not allow me to do all of this right away?
That's been the consistent question of this, now 10 years that I've been working with you, Cindy. So, and I think it's a great question, but I think the number one thing is, it actually goes back to where you start. So if you write your grant and you build in this sort of protocol, you have the ability, you have more flexibility. In essence, you're not just operating your program based on the grant funds. You're actually saying, this is my program. Can your grant funds support my program? That's obviously a little bit better approach. But if you're already in the middle of it and you can't really shift on the fly, the best thing to do is to build up that employer base and to get them to recognize how you're cultivating your customer base, your client base, so that they can fit within the workforce. And then employers are going to be more eager to bring your folks on and consider them for long-term employment. That's what we have found with the incarcerated population. We just hammer in on, look, these guys are going to fit, they're going to work within your area, and they're really going to be quality employees because we've assessed them and we can predict how they might interact. Hopefully that answers the question, Cindy, but yeah, it's a challenging one, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I should say too, if anybody wants to come off mute and actually talk, I don't want to unmute all the lines, because we would have probably 45 dogs, because I just saw Spencer's dog entered his room as well. The dogs want to hear about match quality today. But if you do want to come off mute and actually talk, we'd love to hear your voice. So you can request it and I'll unmute you. But it looks like there's a couple other folks in the chat as well, Brett.
Yeah, and that was Val Rafferty. He wrote, An interesting site popped up on a previous presentation, Career One Stop for .org for veterans. Yeah, this is the ONET. This is basically what the Department of Labor does, and they do a great job of matching up with what people can do within the workforce. And a lot of it's based on the algorithms or these keywords, the Boolean operators of were you a dog handler in the military, for example? Well, we have dog trainers here within a particular area. Um, and those particular things are going to be good matches for you. Or you can do the interest profiler and get your RIASEC score, your profile, and then we can match your job based on what those things are. Those are always helpful. Those are beginners. But remember, RIASEC is a predictor of volition, meaning choice, and interest is not always a predictor of placement. And so I'm always leery of how RISEC is used in a placement format because it's not intended for that. It's really intended to measure the interests that a person has and what choices they have based on those interests. Yeah, and it's my next move. So thank you, Cindy. Let me go back up here. We have to meet the veterans where they are. Yes. So how does this align with veterans who need help and self-identity problems and challenges? Great question. And I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce the name. This is Celsi Williams. This is where you have to do the co-model of, you have to say, okay, we have to do treatment with employment. You have to do it simultaneous. A lot of times it's very hard to get I'll just give an example of a combat veteran who they're rock stars in the military because they're trained between the grades of E1 and E4, 120% of that individual salary is spent on training them on their profession within the military. So they come out very highly skilled. If they get injured in that process and they don't make it to the senior enlisted group, for example, where they get additional training, but they get a training on how to be a leader, then oftentimes they're left with this, I have all these skills, but now I've been injured, or I've got this issue that won't allow me to stay in the military. And so as a result, I am now, having this identity crisis because I can do a lot of great things, but I can't do it in where I really want to do it. So addressing those is really helpful in the cognitive components. That's what the cognitive components are for, like thinking for a change or moral recognition therapy, so that people really get to understand how do they get their identity back into a space where they're ready to take that next move. And motivational interviewing can help individuals really move into that. Gabriel says, if I'm not mistaken, one of the core principles of IPS is a limited caseload. You're right. And that is very challenging. You guys will probably not be able to meet that caseload standard of 20. I think, I don't know, Cindy can confirm this, but I know when I was going around, some of the caseloads were 30, even 40 folks per practitioner.
Sometimes more than that. Yeah, sometimes more than that. I've seen is 50 or even more. So I think that point from Gabriel is well taken. And I think it's one of the things that comes up is this idea of, if I can't do, and this is a question to you, Brad, it's a compound question before, but if I can't do the IPS model because for whatever reason I can't meet the caseload, I don't have integrated mental health, I don't have the ability to integrate mental health into my employment services. If I can't do the full model, should I bother doing any part of it? And I think that's the question for you.
That's a great question. That was the intent of the protocol. If you can't do the full model, understandable. Having a coalition definitely helps, because now you've got individuals who you can partner with that can help you meet that objective. But the protocol really is about, how do we help this individual gain an employment identity? That's really important. And how well do they interact? Just with the big five, you can determine a little bit more about how they might interact within a workspace. That's obviously, I can't get too granular in this particular presentation because I don't have enough time. But when you're trained to interpret that assessment, you know more about how neuroticism operates as a governor on extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, and how they might be restricted by those fears that individuals have. And that's what neuroticism is, those core or innate fears that individuals have. And obviously, when you have a mental health concern, your fears can be irrational, but they're very real. And so you got to address that. And oftentimes those are governors in that. It's a predictive tool which tells you, okay, if they can reach that 30th or 37th percentile, they'll more than likely be advanceable on the job. But you've got to see, can they reach that percentile? That's the key. But the protocol helps. Yeah, there's really not a one answer that fits that, Cindy. So that's a hard one to answer.
I'm here to ask the hard questions.
Is there a
And thank
link
you.
to
I
the
was
test
trying to
and
go back to
instructions
the
on it?
protocol, but I realized it was going to just give people vertigo if I
Yeah,
by scrolling
on the
back too
slides, I
quickly.
saw that. Yeah,
So I apologize
thank
for
you.
that.
No worries. Gabriel says, is there a link and a test and instructions on how to administer and implement it? I'll let Cindy answer that, because this requires additional training, and that's something that you'd have to seek out. And as of now, I think I'm the only person who does that nationwide. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that to do that specific test, yes, you need to be qualified, of which Brett is. I
Yes.
certainly am not. But there are, I think, some of the ideas can be incorporated perhaps without doing the formal test. Is that right, Brett? Because I know the formal
Yeah.
test requires the ability to interpret the formal test results, but
Mhm.
some of the ideas behind the
Mhm.
test may be things that could be incorporated more informally into as sort of
Correct.
an interim step.
With the visual graphics, that helps a ton, because you don't have to know the mechanics of that tool. You'll just get a visual picture of that person's interaction patterns. That's why I moved that direction. But it is a level 3 or a level C assessment, which means you have to have a master's or a doctorate in order to interpret it. But you can be trained on how to interpret it effectively. If you're trained by someone who knows how to interpret it, and you stay you maintain your fidelity in that interpretive process, you'll be able to really administer this and use it as a predictive tool and help your protocol, if you're using the protocol. But the visual graphic is the real key to this, because you don't have to know all the interworkings and okay, which number is which and how do I figure out 37th percentile. If you get the visual graphic and you see the profile, that'll be the biggest plus. But remember, matching profiles with how the business does their profile is really going to be helpful. But that's a great question, Gabriel.
I've included Brett's contact information here on this slide too. So if you have more questions about the protocol itself, you
Correct.
can reach out to Brett. I know we're getting close to time, so I want to see if Brett has other last minute things. And if not, I just want to say, I have a closing thing to say first, but Brett, I'm going to
Go for it. Go for it, Cindy.
So I think part of the idea here is this is a specific protocol and it is evidence informed. And we understand that everybody doing this work has constraints, financial constraints,
Yeah.
resource constraints, grant funder restraints, whatever you call it, there are constraints. But we don't want to get in the habit of letting the constraints drive us. We want to try and drive the work forward, regardless of the constraints, with the idea that eventually we might be able to move some of those constraints and impact some of those constraints. So I think sometimes we get caught in the, I can't do it perfectly, so I'm not going to do it at all. And I think thinking about this idea and thinking about match quality is really important. When you think about it just from a very practical, tangible way, if you have to keep helping the same veteran 5 or 10 times because you're placing them and you're getting counted, they're placing, but it's not a good match and the quality match isn't there. That's 9 other veterans that you could have helped. And that's potentially 9 employers who might not work with you or hire those other 9 veterans, right? So it's the idea of moving the conversation forward and incorporating what you can, and it may be baby steps as you move forward and as you do this. So that I'm going to stop there, but Brett, I'm going to let you have the last word.
That's perfect, Cindy. I think what you said is right on. I'm with you. I don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. This is a slow process. It's not easy. As you know, there's multifaceted issues that are affecting this customer base. So you can't just do a one-size-fits-all approach and say that's going to work. And as you continue to build your business in this area, consider using this type of protocol, consider using these types of evidence-informed approaches so that the next time you write your grant, you can actually write this in and do a pilot, see how well this works for you. That's the information I have for you. Thank you, Cindy, for letting me have time with these folks again.
Thank you so
Good to see
much,
everyone.
Brett. And thank you all for joining us. We hope you had, we have one more session today coming up at 4:15. So about 15 minutes, we have a chance to meet the exhibitors. So please make sure you check in there and you can see some of our exhibitors and hear some of the things. And I believe there may be a raffle prize for folks who are participating in that. So just to carrot, tease you there a little bit, but thank you all. Thank you, Brett. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You do the same. Thank you.